Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the Wizard Delsere's Magnum Opus set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses so we'll know how to gear out our character. This set revolves around the slow time skill. Having a slow time bubble active will provide you with damage reduction, and enemies affected by the slow time bubble will take increased damage from a handful of skills, including Arcane Orb, which we'll be using in our build. Every time we cast this skill, the cooldown of slow time will also be reduced, allowing us to cast it more often and ensure we can benefit from the set bonus damage increase on all enemies. You'll need to remember that the set bonuses don't buff the damage of Arcane Orb directly. Every enemy will need to be affected by a slow time bubble, so the more cooldown reduction you have, the better you will be able to drop the bubbles wherever they're needed. It is also worthy to note that the monsters in this dungeon can do pretty significant damage to you. Therefore, considering all of this, cooldown reduction and toughness will be the key focus areas for the gearing and skill setup. In this setup, we are using 5 of the 6 set pieces in the helm, shoulders, torso, hands, and leg slots. In the feet slot, we have Ice Climbers, which provide immunity to freeze and immobilize effects. The elites in this dungeon will occasionally cast Ice Bombs, which can freeze you in place for several moments. Monster density can be quite high, and many of the enemies shoot projectiles, so getting frozen in the wrong spot can easily result in you taking fatal damage failing the dungeon, and these boots will prevent this from happening. In the wrist slot, we have Warzekian arm guards providing a run speed buff, and in the waist slot, we have Crown's buff belt, which provides another run speed buff. In the main hand slot, we take Ingium, which will drastically reduce the cooldown on skills after killing an elite, including slow time and teleport. Teleport will benefit from this the most, allowing us to traverse the dungeon extremely rapidly, giving more time to focus on the dungeon objectives. In the offhand slot, we take Cosmic Strand, which is crafted with a recipe at the blacksmith. This source provides an extra rune for teleport, further increasing mobility. If you don't have the recipe, then you should take the Oculus source for a chance to reset the cooldown on teleport. In the next slot, we take Talisman of Aranok, which prevents us from taking cold damage. This amulet is very useful in dealing with the ice bombs cast by the dungeon elites, especially in the midst of larger packs of monsters where it may be difficult to see them coming. In one of the finger slots, we have Halo of Karini, which provides a significant toughness increase. The monsters in this dungeon can do a significant amount of damage, so this ring is highly recommended. And in the other finger slot, we have Ring of the Royal Grandeur, allowing us to gain the 6-piece set bonus with only 5 of the 6 set pieces equipped. When it comes to rerolling stats on the gear, the top priorities are cooldown reduction and toughness. Monsters hit really hard in this dungeon, so don't go in without a lot of toughness. Also, you will want to avoid having too much damage output. We will be taking the Black Hole skill to help group up enemies for the dungeon objectives, and we want our damage output low enough to avoid Black Hole significantly damaging or killing monsters on its own. Being able to kill the elites in 3 or 4 hits with Arcane Orb seems to be a good sweet spot where you'll have enough damage to finish the dungeon in time. You can reduce your damage output by unequipping damage buffing legendary gems, unassigning Paragon points, or replacing your gear pieces with pieces that have lower stats. For Kanai's Cube in the weapon slot, we have Unstable Scepter, which buffs the damage of Arcane Orb. This legendary power is highly recommended. You may not have enough damage output to complete the dungeon in time without it. In the armor slot, we take Leoric's Crown for increased cooldown reduction, particularly useful for slow time and teleport. And in the jewelry slot, we have Mara's Kaleidoscope, which prevents us from taking poison damage. This amulet is very useful when completing the second primary dungeon objective, which requires us to group up enemies that shoot many poison projectiles. Avoiding the poison damage will allow us to focus on the objectives and not worry about needing to dodge the numerous projectiles. With the 2 damage prevention amulets in this build, negating both cold and poison damage, you will be able to take a lot of hits that would otherwise do some significant damage to you. For gems, we have a diamond in the head slot for cooldown reduction, topazes in the torso and leg slots, and an emerald in the weapon slot. For legendary gems, we have Bane of the Powerful and Zay's Stone of Vengeance. These 2 gems can be swapped out for defensive gems if you need to reduce your damage output. And lastly, Molten Wildebeest Gizzard for some life regeneration in the event we take any hits. For Paragon, the main priorities are movement speed, maximum arcane power, cooldown reduction, and resource cost reduction. Next, let's go over the skills. We'll be using Slow Time, which is the focal point for the set. We take the Time Shell rune for the reduced cooldown. Next, we have Arcane Orb, which is our main damage dealing skill. We take the Frozen Orb rune for its superior area damage coverage. Then we have Black Hole with the Supermassive rune, used to group up enemies in tight packs before casting Slow Time. Next we have Wave of Force. We take the Impactful Wave rune, which repels projectiles back to the enemy shooter. This mechanic is mandatory for the dungeon. Next we have Teleport with the Safe Passage rune for some much needed mobility in this slow going dungeon. Using Teleport, you can pass through walls, which can save you several seconds in a few spots in the dungeon. If you do not have the Cosmic Strand source equipped, then use the Wormhole rune instead. Then we have Storm Armor, which is needed in order to benefit from the toughness buff on the Halo of Carini ring. We take the power of the Storm rune for the reduced arcane power cost. For the passive skills, we have Unstable Anomaly, which prevents death in the event fatal damage is taken. The monster density is high in this dungeon, and the projectiles shot by the enemies can really stack up and do a significant amount of damage. This passive skill will prevent you from an inadvertent death while you're trying to focus on the dungeon objectives. Next, we have Blur for a toughness increase, and Astral Presence for arcane power generation. We don't have an arcane power generator skill equipped in this build because we won't have much additional time to stand still and cast it and still be able to complete the dungeon. Any arcane power generation you can get will help you keep pumping out arcane orbs. And lastly, we have Evocation for increased cooldown reduction. Now let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary dungeon objective is to catch 20 different enemies in a cast of slow time 4 times. This objective will require you to do a bit of grouping of monsters, but more importantly, you will want to learn to recognize which monster type packs will contain 20 plus enemies. There are several different types of enemies in this dungeon. There are large single Opus Radical Elites, packs of large Flesh Gorgers, packs of medium-sized Moon Clan Impalers, packs of small Sand Wasp, packs of small Scarabs, and packs of small Beetles. Generally, only the packs of Scarabs will contain more than 20 monsters, so it is recommended to get this first objective completed using 4 different packs of Scarabs. If you see 2 packs of different monsters in close proximity of each other, then you can also group them up in a 20 plus enemy pack, but you will need at least 2 packs if there are no Scarabs. The other monster types just do not come in large enough packs. When approaching any pack of monsters in this dungeon, you generally want to use the following sequence. First, cast Black Hole, which will suck them in close together to group them up. When they're in a clump, cast Slow Time on them to make progress toward the first objective, and gain the damage buff for Arcane Orb from the 6-piece set bonus. Then, cast Arcane Orb to kill them off. If there are more than 20 enemies in an area, but you hit fewer than 20 enemies on the pool, then you can try to group them up again, as long as you can survive it. So keep moving around, circling the monsters. Try not to backtrack in a path where projectiles may be coming towards you. Having high cooldown reduction for the slow time skill will make this much easier to do. The second primary dungeon objective is to reflect 200 projectiles. You must have the Wave of Force skill with the impactful Wave rune assigned. This is the only way to reflect projectiles. 2 different monster types cast projectiles in this dungeon, the Wasps and the Impalers. While the Impaler projectiles can make progress toward this second objective, it is recommended to only focus on the packs of Wasps. The Wasps generate a very large number of projectiles, and when the projectiles are suspended in the slow time bubble, they can really add up. So for this objective, you will follow the same general sequence of attack. First, cast Black Hole to group them up, then cast Slow Time to slow the projectiles. But instead of immediately casting Arcane Orb, wait for a few seconds to allow the Wasp to shoot projectiles and let them add up within the slow time bubble. Once there's a large number built up, get near the projectiles and cast Wave of Force. You don't have to be in the line of fire. This will reflect the projectiles back. Then, cast Arcane Orb to kill off the enemies in the area. So, in review, the simplest way to approach the dungeon is to have the following mentality. When you see a pack of Scarabs, group them up for the first objective. When you see a pack of Wasps, group them up for the second objective. When you see any other monster type, kill them. Whether it's single elites, packs of Flesh Gorgers, packs of Impalers, or packs of Beetles, not to be confused with the Scarabs. Naturally, if you see 2 or more packs near each other, then you can group them up to attempt to make progress on either objective. But focusing on only the Scarabs and Wasps can get the dungeon completed, and it is a much simpler approach. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. I've broken the map up into 2 segments. The dungeon is fairly linear, with only one main section that will require backtracking, so just follow the right side wall all the way around and you will cover all of it. As you are progressing through the dungeon, make sure you kill all enemies as you go. You probably won't have enough time to pass through it a second time looking for stragglers. There's no particular dungeon features or locations that you will need to be familiar with. The different enemies can spawn anywhere in the dungeon, so when you see a pack of a certain monster type, just perform the corresponding action as recommended in the dungeon objective section of this guide. So now that you have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 3, then to the Bastion's Keep Stronghold waypoint. In town, head north out of the vendor area, then head to the right to the Skycrown Battlements portal. From there, head northeast. Hug the right side wall until you reach a corner that forces you to turn left. The dungeon entrance is located in this corner, positioned on a small overhang jutting out over the battlefield down below. And next, we'll look at the playthrough. For this run, I went with pretty bare bones gear to demonstrate techniques. I had to equip the Unstable Scepter weapon to have enough damage to complete the dungeon within the time limit. And I also had to equip the Halo of Carini ring for the toughness benefit in order to survive. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you a much easier time completing the dungeon. Once inside the dungeon, cast your Storm Armor buff and head southeast. Here's a group of Impalers. There won't be 20 of them, so just take them down. Remember, the main cast sequence is Black Hole, Slow Time, Arcane Orb. Here's a single elite, just take him down. A pack of Flesh Gorgers, there won't be 20 of them, so just take them down too. Even 2 packs of these monsters are difficult to group up in a pack of 20 due to their large size. Another elite. A pack of beetles, there won't be 20, but you can see scarabs around the corner for guaranteed progress toward the first primary dungeon objective. Impalers and an elite. Kill them off. Don't assign a follower for this dungeon, so they won't interfere when you're trying to group up monsters or get projectiles reflected. Here's another group of Impalers. There's no other packs nearby, so just take them down. Coming up is a pack of Scarabs. Try to isolate any of these packs if possible, so you can get progress on the first objective, and get them cleared away so you can try to group up the nearby wasps. There were several projectiles built up in the slow time bubble, so use Wave of Force and then clear out the monsters. And of course, you can use Wave of Force again to get some more projectiles reflected from any residual enemies. Another pack of Flesh Gorgers, take them down. More Impalers and an elite. We might have been able to group up a pack of 20 monsters there, but it's not worth it. Just focus on the Scarabs and make it easier on yourself. Speaking of Scarabs, here's group number 3 of 4. As we backtrack to start segment number 2, make sure you don't leave any stragglers. We won't be coming back through this section again. A pack of beetles and a pack of wasps right next to each other for group number 4 of 4. The first primary dungeon objective is complete. It was a little too messy and the quarters were too tight to try to reflect the wasp projectiles there. That's the only time when you won't use Scarabs for the first objective, when there's 2 packs of monsters right next to each other and Black Hole naturally groups them up together without much extra effort on your part. Arcane Orb with the Frozen Orb Room casts an orb outward from you that explodes at the end of its path. With Unstable Scepter equipped, you want this explosion to occur near the enemies you're trying to kill to maximize the skill's damage, since the Scepter causes this explosion to trigger 2 times instead of just once. So you want to keep your distance from monsters when casting Arcane Orb as much as possible. Here's a pack of wasps, and we need some big progress on the second objective. With slow time, you can really kite these monsters around to get them to produce a lot of projectiles. Get in close and cast Wave of Force. There's no other threats around, so now you can just stand in the slow time bubble and let another round of projectiles build up. And the second primary dungeon objective is complete. Now we just focus on killing the remaining enemies. Here's another Scarab pack that could have been used for progress on the first dungeon objective. And more wasps that could have been used for the second dungeon objective. There's typically enough packs of the Scarabs and wasps to leverage only those groups for the dungeon objectives. You just need to be able to recognize the different monster types and be disciplined about your cast sequence. Here's the last remaining enemy. And we're done. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.